Shabbat Shalom. This morning we read a portion that begins with the well-known story of Noah. The world is full of evil, so irredeemable that it is destroyed, except for the family of Noah, protected in an ark crafted of gopher wood. And Noah is in the position where he must rebuild the world. Then at the end of our Torah portion, we read a different sort of story. People had the same language, the same words, but shared with their ancestors the tradition of evil. And they said, "Let us build a tower, let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered." And God says, "Am echad v'safa achat lechulam." They have one nation, they are one language, but if they are capable of this, they are capable of anything. If they, whatever it is that they are doing, if they can do this, then surely there is nothing that is beyond their conception. There is nothing that is beyond their imagination to do that is harmful in the world. And so God comes down to see what has happened, and God confuses their language and shatters the tower, forces them to give up on their project. And this is the story of the tower called the Tower of Babel. I'd like to suggest that this is an ancient story that actually speaks to us today. It is a story that is found in the biblical text with many purposes, but one of the simplest. In the Hebrew school, the Sunday school version of this story, it explains the answer to a question. If Noah and his family came off the ark with one ethnicity, with one culture, with one language, how did we come to have the mosaic of different languages and cultures that adorn the world? And I'd like to suggest, though, that the story today of how language is confused into Babel is in fact a story that gives us insight to words that are being spoken and shared even now. There is confusion about language. There is confusion about truth. What is going on 6,000 miles away from us in the land of Israel and Gaza. There's confusion in the media, confusion on college campuses, in streets and squares, in forums around the world. And much like the story of the Tower of Babel, we live in a world where there are multiple languages being spoken, there are multiple claims of truth. So I want to note that today I'm actually speaking to two different audiences. So some of you have heard me speak on this topic before, and you can already guess some of what I'm going to share. And I hope that you take from today a little bit more resolution, a little bit more detail, a little bit more nuance. There are others who showed up this morning for a celebration, for a bar mitzvah. You come from different walks of life, from different backgrounds. This may not be an issue that is important to you. This may not be an issue you think is relevant to you. This may not be an issue on which you are informed. And so my encouragement is that you come away with eyes a little bit more opened. And this is an adult topic, but if you are turning 13 in our Jewish tradition, it means that you are becoming an adult. And this is what is being talked about, not just on the news, but in school hallways, in Reels, and on TikTok. So I want to talk to you this morning about the Tower of Babel and the power of rubble. And I want to focus on just one story. On Tuesday afternoon this week, I got an alert, a New York Times headline, "Israeli strike kills hundreds in hospital," Palestinians say. And you watch the headlines change. At least 500 dead in strike on Gaza hospital, Palestinians say. Suddenly, we're not so sure it's Israel. At least 500 dead in blast at Gaza hospital, Palestinians say. And then the headline changes again. Hundreds die in explosion at Gaza hospital, setting off exchanges of blame. So the headlines go from Israel killed a lot of people to people are blaming each other. Yesterday, in small print, on page 2, or in the online edition, you need to look for it, the New York Times printed a retraction. Quote, "On Wednesday, hundreds of people killed in an explosion in a blast in a hospital complex in Gaza. described incorrectly a video filmed by a woman at the hospital after the blast. The hospital itself was not ruined. Its parking lot was damaged most heavily in the blast. So the New York Times changed its story again and again and again. The gray lady got a little grayer, but unfortunately that retraction was a day late and a wordle short. Mark Twain once said that a lie will fly around the whole world while truth is still getting its boots on. Except, by the way, Mark Twain was not the person who said that. In 1834, that quote was already attributed to Thomas Jefferson. So there you go. And that was the case here, though, that truth is still getting its boots on, because hundreds, thousands of media outlets ran the story that Israelis blew up a hospital. There were demonstrations around the world. There were calls for revenge. There were riots. There were recriminations. Now, it turns out that even within the world of Palestinians, there are debates, there are divisions, and there are several different groups active in Gaza. What they have in common is that they tend to put their military sites right next to civilian sites. So it turns out that not far from the hospital, a group called Palestinian Islamic Jihad was firing rockets at Israel, and one of them misfired and, still full of fuel, fell in the parking lot at the hospital. And as anyone who has a Kia that has malfunction can tell you, one car that blows up and catches fire in a parking lot, the next thing you know. But it was too late, because a world that will jump to criticize a missile attack on a hospital when they think it is done by Israelis does not seem to care if Palestinians shoot 6,000 rockets at Israeli civilians, and certainly doesn't care if a Palestinian rocket kills their own. And so that is the challenge here, that Israel, and I will admit this, is not always right, but more often than not is trying to be. Israel waited to respond while the lie was traveling the world. Israel was still getting its boots on, waiting to respond because they wanted to review the footage. They wanted to be sure that, in fact, they were pretty sure their forces were not active at that time in that area, but they wanted to confirm that it wasn't them. But by then it is too late. And in fact, Israel has a history of actually checking to see, did we do right? Do we do wrong? There's a sense of introspection. About a year ago, there was a gun battle between Palestinian militants, terrorists, and Israelis, and a journalist was killed, and Israel investigated and said, you know what? It was our bullet that killed this person. We didn't mean to, but we were in a battle, and we have to acknowledge responsibility when it is ours. The other side has no interest in doing that. The other side has no interest in the truth. There's a fundamental moral issue here. If you read the story of the Tower of Babel carefully, the sages do, they tell us that as the builders got higher and higher in building their tower, they were having supply chain issues. That it gets harder and harder to get those bricks all the way up that building. And so it came to be that if, as the people were climbing the tower to build it, if a person fell off the tower, they paid no heed. If a brick fell, they sat down and mourned and wept. And that is what is going right now, the power of rubble in the Tower of Babel. We can talk about hundreds of buildings that have been damaged or destroyed in Gaza. If Israel had wanted to kill tens and hundreds of thousands of people, they have the arms to do that. They are doing their best not to, because Israel values the person more than the brick. Israel is the only army in the world that has ever told civilians to evacuate in advance of an attack. Israel is the only country that has ever sent, and I know soldiers who've told me this story, that Hamas has locked civilians on the roof of their headquarters to ensure that if Israel attacks their center, it attacks their military headquarters, that civilians would be killed. And Israeli soldiers ran up the stairs to unlock the rooftop staircase so the civilians could leave before that headquarters was destroyed. Israel values the people more than the brick. Israel uses weapons to shield its people. Hamas uses its people to shield its weapons. And what happens when you value weapons and bricks over people is this. Gaza is short on supplies. Gaza is somehow not running out of rockets. The last war, tons and tons of cement were sent into Gaza to rebuild buildings and hospitals and schools. The best developed facility in Gaza is something called the Metro. But it is not a subway. It is not for guys with a sense of flair. It is an underground system of hiding places for weapons and training for those who commit terror. Gaza, in some places, does not have a functioning sewer system because the pipes that come in are what are used to build the rockets and the launchers that send them. There will be people who will talk about an occupation of Gaza, about a blockade. I'd like to point out that Gaza has a border with Egypt, another Arab country. There are plenty of roads that could be used for people and material to go in and out. Talk to Egypt. There are no Jews in Gaza except for the 200 who are being held hostage. But in this world of Babel, clear messages are hard to sustain. This is a war. When someone has killed hundreds of your people and said that they have no qualms about doing it again, you have the right to defend yourself. International law and Jewish law says that sometimes war is necessary, but there is an ethic. You have to give the enemy a chance to surrender, and when it is possible, you avoid killing those who are not a threat. But war means that sometimes there is damage and death, even to those who you wish it did not happen. If someone is planning to kill your children and they are in their house, you take them out even if it means killing those around him. But you can't target his children and his family if he is not home. Only an evil person would rejoice at the murder of a baby, would justify and celebrate rape. And Hamas fighters posted videos on social media of doing exactly that. And here's the thing. There are people who rally around the world, say we support Hamas. The problem is those rallies started even before Israel responded. Those rallies are in support of rape and murder and torture. Because if you just wanted to support the Palestinians, you could have rallied on October 6th. A lie can travel from Maine to Georgia while truth is drawing on her boots, said John Randolph of Virginia, conveniently between those two states. A lie can travel from Maine to Georgia while truth is drawing on her boots. And here in Georgia, you have people denying in one breath that there were atrocities and defending with another. But in some ways, those people are easiest to respond to. Their own lies call them out, and they are clear about who they are and what they stand for. The challenge is that there are those who are enablers. So, in the days when communism was ascendant, there were those in the Western world who spoke out in favor of Stalin, even as he was murdering millions of his own people. And Stalin had a word for those people. He called them useful idiots. And we have our share. There are groups like Jewish Voices for Peace, demonstrating against Israel, demonizing Israel, reciting mourners' Kaddish. I assure you, if they had been touring the Gaza border on October 7th, or if they had decided to attempt to tour Gaza, we would be called upon to say Kaddish for them right now. And in fact, many of the residents of those communities, I've heard stories. There was a couple who their life's work, their hobby, their Tikkun Olam project was picking up at the border crossing point Palestinians who were coming for treatment in Israel, taking them to the hospital to get their treatment and making sure they came safely home. That was their tzedakah project. And they were among those murdered. But there's an even larger group, and some of us here today may be in that group, and that is the group with whom I think we must engage most. It is natural, if you are a person of kindness, a person of ethics, a person of liberal Western values, when you see a conflict, you are naturally empathetic, and you say, you know what? There must be two sides. And in fact, whoever presents the most woeful tale must be right. And that is the trouble with following the Babble. Because when you see that happen, you stand on the sidelines and you offer statements of neutrality. We wring our hands. What a terrible world. But in a world of Babel, sometimes truth has trouble emerging from the rubble. Because it is the nature of Western logic, of relativism, that there is more than one right answer. And we love shades of gray. We love a TV show, a movie with an anti-hero. We love Walter Like. We had Better Call Saul. We love Walter White. But sometimes there is actually good and evil in the world. We cheer on Walter White, but we don't cheer for actual meth distributors. After 9/11, no one was saying, you know what, well, you have to see it from Al-Qaeda's perspective. The newspapers don't, when they report that someone was raped, then quote the accused, well, you know, did you see what she was wearing? And so, our portion today talks about different solutions to evil. In the days of Noah, the solution was put the good people in an ark and wipe out everyone else. In the days of the Tower of Babel, it was like, look, we can't kill everyone. God says, I promised that I would not bring utter destruction, but you must wipe out the capability to evil. God promised never to bring a flood again, but God did not say, I will stop responding to evil. So from where I sit, the only way to bring about peace is to wipe out an organization that has called for murder, that has in its charter the call to kill every Jewish person. It is the only thing that guarantees the safety of people on both sides of the border. The people of Israel deserve better than to live in fear of rockets and kidnapping and rape and torture. And the people of Gaza deserve a government that cares about the well-being of their own children, deserves a leadership that values its children more than it values its rockets. I don't know how that happens. I don't know if Israel is actually going to be able to do so, if the price to be paid will be worth it, or if the price to be paid is one that can be gotten away with in a world where the power of rubble is louder than even the babble from the tower. Because even if the tower is reduced to rubble, it may not be the end of the babble. So I would ask us, each of us, as we leave this place, as we go about our lives, to listen to what is being said. Because the folks who cheer for dead Jews are not going to be convinced. The people we need to talk to are the people who naively assume that there is truth to every narrative, or afraid of saying something that will get them canceled. And so we call to account the media, the campuses. The ivory tower is a tower that is especially liable to babble. The ivory tower is sometimes home especially to those who care about bricks more than people. But I would encourage you, it is very easy to retreat into a bubble, to hide like Noah did in the ark. When God saw that there was evil in the tower, God said, let us go down and see what's happening. Let us go knock down the tower. So I think it is a responsibility of every ethical person to engage people who are caught up in falsehood, to engage people when they give credence or a platform to those who repeat the words of terrorists and murderers. Remind them that this is a world where there may be shades of gray, but there is also black and white. Yes, sometimes there is more than one right answer, but there are also answers that are just wrong. We live in a world where Israel is not always right, but is at least trying to be, and is facing an enemy that does not care. That there are those who are seeking to limit harm to the innocent, and there are those who post videos that celebrate it. That sometimes there are wars that are fought because they must be, and the only question is how they are fought. The power of Babel, the Tower of Babel must come down, must be brought down, so that perhaps truth and maybe even peace can emerge from the rubble. Shabbat Shalom.